Welcome to this Excel video. Today we are going to look at how to create a database in Excel. And to illustrate the point, we're going to look at 4 different examples, and because this is a channel all about creating Excel systems for people who work in sport, they are all going to be sport examples. Let's consider firstly, what is a database? Well, in our context, it's having a bunch of numbers, putting them into a place where they can be stored and organized, producing some information such as a simple statistic or a more complex report with some charts and tables, and using that to draw insight and then go and have a conversation with either an athlete or a coach or both to implement some kind of new idea or change. The concept of a database is that it is growing, so something that has a structure that allows you to every minute or every hour or every day or every month add a new set of data, and so that may just be a single row or it may be a whole lot, but either way your database can cope with the addition of new information. There's a statistic that says for data scientists about 60% of the time they're simply tidying up data that they get given so that they can do something with it. So you can take this hassle away by being organized from the beginning. And the way to do that in Excel is that you need to use rows and columns very, very effectively. And by this I mean that you need to have very clear column headings. We'll see examples of that shortly. And that for every new record that you add, it goes into a new row. Definitely do not add new columns, and definitely do not add new tabs every time you get a different data set come in. You can do a lot of things to make your life easier, such as using data validation, but the key and the golden rule is to avoid blank rows and blank columns. Before I continue with this theory part, let's go and check out the first example. We have got very, very basic training session information. At the top we have in bold some column headings. They are date, athlete, training type, duration, RPE and load. And below there's, let's just see, a bunch of data. I'll double click and it goes down. We've got 190 odd rows of data here. Because I've got bold headings, Excel thinks that they are field names, and if I click on the data tab I can simply choose filter, and it's picked up that these are things that I might like to sort and filter by, such as just showing information from one athlete. Now that didn't take any expertise to be able to do that. Excel filters are a fantastic resource for you if you're just quickly looking to find something. If I clear the filter, it goes back to the beginning. What I think the best bet is to click on the Insert tab and choose Table. If you do so, the most noticeable change is that the Excel table format gets applied, and you can change that to a different style, be it more intense or less depending on your preference. First thing that's always a good idea to do is to give your table a name. I'm going to call it training session. What's good about Excel tables is that it's expecting for you to add more rows, and it's made it easy for you to do so. To illustrate this, I'm going to click in row 8. On the View tab, choose Freeze Panes. Now as I scroll down, those headings do not disappear on me, so I can see what I'm doing. In the right hand cell of the bottom row, I'm going to put my cursor and then hit Tab. When I do, it goes to the first cell and the next row, and it's waiting for me to put some new information in. I can type the new record in there, and here's one of the things that I mentioned that was a way to make entering data easier. That is a data validation list. So I can choose a name here, such as Dwayne Baker. I can also choose a training session from the list. Let's choose fitness, and I simply type in what my duration and RPE was. And you can see here that we've got a formula that is automatically calculating duration times RPE. If I hit enter again, it's waiting for my next data entry. Control D is copy down, so I'm going to use that. Pick another name from the list. Let's pretend they're doing the same session, same duration, slightly different RPE. If I was sloppy and I left a blank row and I started typing, there would be no drop down box. Excel does not recognize this as part of the table. I could grab this little handle and pull it down, and then it would recognize it, and I could just keep going as normal. But there's really no value to this blank row here. It's best to avoid altogether. If I go home, I'm just going to unhide a few rows because there's a couple more points I'd like to make. We have got 3 descriptor columns and 3 data columns in this set. We've got a date, we've got an athlete name, and we've got a training type. I could add in another descriptor. Click on column B, choose insert, and we can see what happens. We get column 1. You can't have a blank column heading, so it just gives it a default one. Let's put week as our column heading, because we might want to do some analysis by week. We don't want to have to go and type in all of these weeks, so let's do something in the control panel to make this automatic. On the left here is our list of names, and on the right we've got a little date table. I'll just drag that up and put headings on there, just because it's easier to understand now. Select the entire table and let's give it a name. I'm going to call it table, spelt the regular way, and then simply type dates with an underscore training session. I'm just doing that to really make it distinctive because we've got 3 other examples here. So I've got a little table where date is in the first column and week is in the second column. If I go back to training session, I can just do a really quick VLOOKUP now that will populate all the rows in the table to date and any new ones that get added as well. To look up this value, so whatever is in A8, I want to look it up in a table that I've just created called Table Dates Training Session. The answer we're looking for is in column 2, and we want an approximate match. The reason we want an approximate match is because every date is not listed in that table. I only listed Mondays, so we just want to find the week that this date belongs to. When I hit enter, the whole table populates. And even better, if I put a new date in, such as the 30th of the 1st, 2016, it picks that up as soon as I hit tab and go along to the next part. So that week lookup with a formula is a really easy way to populate data automatically. You might do the same for athlete position. One thing I like to do in this particular type of database is to have a record for team. This gets entered by the coach based upon what they believe the RPE was and what the duration that they set was. That way everyone can be referenced against that. Now that we've got a little bit of information in here, we could do something very simple, such as insert a pivot table. Let's put it on a new sheet. So with any cells selected inside the table, we could click on recommended pivot tables. Let's check this out. If I expand this little wizard out, we get a better view. We can see that it's asking us, do we want sum of duration by athlete and training type? that could be useful? Do you want sum of load by RPE and training type? It's taken a guess at the kind of analysis that we're interested in. Let's try this one, the sum of load by athlete and training type. So it builds a pivot table for us, and it shows us the decisions that it has made. Training type is in columns, sum of load is in values. Let's name the sheet. So I can go back and add a second pivot table. I'm just going to choose a manual pivot table this time, but I want to put it on the same worksheet that we've already got a pivot table on. I'll just put it here on the right. This time I want to add athlete in the filter, week, and then date in the rows, and you can see that cascading effect, and put load as our values. If I go across and choose team, which is the bottom of the list, we can see roughly what the team load has been across the 9 days of training that we've done so far. On a PC, I could really easily insert a chart. It would be called a pivot chart, and you can see it would be quite nicely formatted for us with those labels along the bottom. I could simply edit the title and I'd be good to go with a reasonable looking chart. And if I went back to the training session sheet, doesn't matter if I'm not adding this in perfect order, Excel can pick that up okay. I can go back to my report. I can see that nothing has changed, but if I right click and choose refresh, the new data adds in and the chart updates. This pivot chart option is not available on a Mac. It's important to know that because you might be hunting around trying to find something that is not there. But you could easily filter this to a specific athlete if you wanted to. And if I'm back in my data set and I want to find out about a particular athlete, I could use just very simple filtering to do so. For example, I could simply choose 1 day and just glance at the table. If I wanted to go back to the beginning, I just clear the filter. If I get some new hardware and I want to add, I simply choose the first available column on the right hand edge of the data set. Let's say I've got some GPS units and I want to add GPS total distance to my data set. There's only going to be GPS data during rugby training sessions, so I'm going to write a little if equation and then use a ran between function just to make up some basic data that says give every player a random number between 4,000 and 6,000. And for all sessions that aren't rugby training, just leave it blank. Hit enter, everything populates. If we scroll down, we'd see a whole lot of blanks too. I don't want that data to be a formula because if I hit F9, you can see it just recalculates. Select everything, copy it, and on the Home tab you can choose paste values. So I've now got, if I wanted to, once again, a new pivot table option, put it on an existing worksheet, see if I can squeeze it between our existing pivot tables. I simply put week, I can put count of GPS distance, and don't forget to put athlete up in the filter. Once again, just pick a player. We can now change this by right clicking, show values as sum, and there we go, our sum of GPS distance for week 1, 2 and 3 for this athlete. with the table selected, we can do various things such as remove the grand totals just to make it a little bit tidier. Haven't put any labels on these charts, which is remiss of me, but let's move along to another example. We've got a set of female team sport athletes. They are in a pre-season phase and they live and train in a very warm environment, so we're worried about hydration. We have got 3 different types of hydration measures that we use. Sometimes we do all of them, other times we don't. Those measures are to self-report urine color, we do USG measurements, and we check post-session body weight and compare it to morning body weight. Each one of those presents an opportunity to flag someone as being at risk, and we can just look at that across the entire day to identify whether players need to have an intervention. So if we look at our data set and bear in mind the stuff that we've talked about already, we have got 3 descriptors and then a 4th one called daytime. So we've got name, date, week, which we've seen before, and then we've got a day type. So G plus 2 means 2 days after a game, G plus 3, 3 days after a game, and then as we scroll down we see 1 day before a game, game day, and so on. So that's what those descriptors are about. We only take USG twice a week, 2 days after the game, which is usually Monday morning, and then 1 day before the game. So they're the days that we collect USG. Every day we use a simple 8-point scale. Here it is here, to identify whether people are well hydrated or dehydrated. And we also collect morning weight and then body weight at the end of each session to identify how much body weight change there is, and we use a scale of 2% or higher as being a flag. So if we look through this data, we've got some manually entered data, and we've also got some formula or calculated data, such as this flag color column. What it's saying is that if urine color is greater than or equal to 5, then we have a flag. Similarly with USG, we have a number that says if it's greater than 1.02, then we have a flag. And finally, if the session change is greater than 2%, we also have a flag. Just as we saw in the previous example, there's lots of different ways that we could look at this data. For a start, we could simply filter, take away everyone out except the person of interest. And on its own, this is already interesting. We can see that this athlete had 3 flags on the first day. We had a conversation, gave her a strategy, and now I've either had 1 or 0 flags for the remaining days. You don't need to do any analysis sometimes to get enough information to go and have that conversation. However, you may want to clear the filter and insert a pivot table on a new worksheet. Called it hydration report. Let's put name in the rows, morning weight, urine color, session, and total flags. This is just some really good summary statistics, but we have to do something to this table. First thing I want to do is put a title on the top. Next, I want to tidy up each of these 4 fields that we've added to our pivot table. Summarize values by average, and then change the format to just 1 decimal place. Summarize by average, and once again, change the number format to 1 decimal place. Average again, number format becomes percentage, again 1 decimal place. And sum of flags is actually alright. What I might do is bring that field list back up and drag flags in again. So I've got it in twice, average flags, sum flags. If I right click, summarize values by average, tidy up the number format, then we've got a good bit of information there. We can see that certain athletes are pretty good and others need a little bit more help. We might not be super happy with this report. After a little while, this might become a little bit meaningless because there's been a change over time. With the table selected, I can insert a slicer by week. And if I put week up the top here, when I click on week 2, the data is going to change in week 1 and week 2. So we can just narrow it down and see just perhaps the last 2 or 3 weeks if we've got a whole lot of data, and look for some trends. Let's check out another example. I've done a whole bunch of videos, a couple of them are linked up in the top right hand corner here, where I looked at a large data set of fitness test information and ways that you could extract and report on that. I'm not going to repeat that, but I just quickly want to go through the format and layout of this table in case you missed it. We've got 4 descriptor columns, date, and I think the most important column, which is test label. We've got an athlete name and we've got a position. Then we've got a bunch of data here. Standard stuff like body weight, Skinfolds, speed, yo-yo test, and MAS. We could insert a column here, add mid-thigh pull, use ran between to create some fake data, and it's going to copy that all the way down. Don't want that ran between formula, so I'm just going to paste values back over the top of the data. So in the space of a few seconds I added a new set of data just to demonstrate how easy it is over time to add new fields. That's the only thing you should be doing in columns. Everything else is just a row of data, a new record in your table. Doesn't have to be in order, although it does help if it's sorted in order. If you wanted to backfill some of your data, add it at the bottom and then resort your table by date. Inside your table, you could put in what I call calculated columns. I've put one in advance and hidden it just for now. And what I did was just use 40 meter and 5 meter speed time to calculate a top speed in kilometers per hour. So you can put calculated columns inside your data. Sometimes I put them on the right hand side of the data, other times I put them in amongst the data next to the fields that they're being calculated from. Again, that doesn't matter, it's up to you. But to always use a table makes those things easy to move around. And so I did that before I started the video. It's called TBL Fitness Test, in case you were wondering. We could easily produce another pivot table. Why don't we do that? Insert pivot table, new worksheet. Give it a quick title. Let's put test label up in the filters, athlete name down the rows, body weight, sum of 8, speed 5 meters. Tidy up this table. Select a test first, doesn't matter which one for our example. Because we've only got one record per test period, immediately that gives us the result we're looking for. If I copy that pivot table and paste it immediately next door, bring up the field list, just drag these fields and pull them out and replace them with other stuff. Yo-yo, mid-thigh pull, MAS. You can see how easy it is to pull up all the data we need. And just like we did in the last video, if we inserted a slicer for test label, We can format it just a little bit. If we were wanting to have a particular layout, we can make it work however we like, and we can change how it looks too. We no longer need test label in the filters because we can just use the slicer to filter. As we can see, only the pivot table on the left is connected. So let's solve that. Firstly, I want to give it a name so I know what I'm looking at. Pivot 1, and I'm going to call it FR for fitness report. Give this a name. Piv2 FR. And now when the slicer is selected, I can choose report connections. And there's no tick next to pivot table number 2, but if I add a tick, it's now connected, and they can be filtered at the same time. I'd go over here and take away the grand totals for both, and we're away, and we could do some charts or whatever we wanted to with this. Back to our fitness test report. I don't like pivot tables for fitness test reporting. I like to be a little bit more creative and specific. As I mentioned, I've got a whole bunch of videos specifically looking at this, but what I wanted to show you is that the best thing you can do is to have the flexibility to be able to show what you want to show. For example, selecting an athlete, having the data update, being able to choose which test sets you want to show, and then have a reference value. Let's find out what position Calvin Wood is. He's a defender. So we want to show averages for the defender. So this is my reference data. This is today. This might be last time. And that's the reference. And I think that's what you want to be creating when you're trying to have a conversation with an athlete or a coach. We wanted this athlete to get better. They haven't got better, and they're still not doing well enough compared to their peer group. And so you can go away and make that discussion a bit more real. Last one I wanted to have a look at is a little bit different. This uses a lot of data validation. And so all the way along here we've got drop-down boxes where a medical person can be adding information about training or match injuries. And so what's different about this table is that it's not so clear what is the data and what are the descriptors, because there's no numbers here. It's all just text. So we have type of training session or match, how the injury occurred, the site of injury. This was from a particular sport and they had a whole lot of common injuries, so they've got them in a special list. A categorization by pathology, some more specific stuff left or right side, and so on. All of these lists are over here in case you're interested in looking at them. So all of these lists just point to our injury register. What's interesting about this particular table is the way that you might analyze it. I think formula is the way to go when you've got mostly text answers. I've written a formula over here to analyze the injuries based upon the contact type, whether it's non-contact or contact, and it's just producing some basic numbers which I'm turning into a chart. It's a lot harder to do that with a pivot table. What you can do is counting, but you can't really do any significant analysis. You can't average and things like that. But I could easily put in a pivot table based upon pathology. So let's try that. Pivot table. Let's break the rules and put it on the existing worksheet, just below the chart that we've already got. If I put pathology in rows, and all I have to do is put some kind of value that Excel can count with. Date's a good one because date's actually a number, so I'm just going to drag that in. At the moment we've got 3 joint and 3 soft tissue injuries. As always, I'm going to get rid of those grand totals. Let's go ahead and add a new row of data. And we'll see the data validation boxes in action. I can choose that it happened during S&C, non-contact during a speed session, let's say, lumbar spine, some low back pain. I'd call that a soft tissue injury, and it's not a specific side. So we've just had another soft tissue injury. Let's go across to our pivot table. What we can see is that our formula table has automatically updated. There's now 4 non-contact and 3 contact injuries, but our pivot table is not. That's because you need to refresh the pivot table. As we do so, we can see that soft tissue now has 4. So regardless of whether you have a whole lot of text to write down or more traditional numbers, the layout of a database doesn't have to be complicated. There's a lot of software out there that you can use that's better at databases than Excel, but it's also more sophisticated, more challenging to learn, and usually expensive, whereas Excel isn't any of those things. Easy to use, flexible, and pretty easy to set something up that'll do a good job. Let's revisit our key points again. Laying out your data, using data validation where you can, and avoiding blank rows and columns. Having some descriptors, the more the better. It allows you to do quick analysis, particularly with pivot tables. Reference data is useful when you're doing comparisons. We saw that in the fitness test example where we referenced against the position average. You can access your data simply by sorting and filtering. You could do a pivot table. We could do some extracting of data, and the key thing is about trying to make recommendations. So we just saw 4 different examples of how you might create a database in Excel. They all pretty much look exactly the same, and so now you can go away, get started on your own, and not make some of those basic mistakes that will have you cleaning up your data day and night. Hey everyone, if you like this and some of my other videos on YouTube, then you might consider also checking out this set of videos on Vimeo. It's available for purchase. There is over 9.5 hours of videos that takes you from start to finish for S&C coaches. Goes through all the basics and all the things that you might need to know to really launch yourself into Excel.